Oh my, the Wii U. Released in 2012 and due to many factors such as stagnant third-party support and the execution of the marketing, had underwhelming results to say the least. The thing kind of fell off the face of the earth in early 2017 as Nintendo were quick to replace it with an Nvidia Shield that plays voice. But for the millionth time, I digress. We're talking about ZOMBI, Ubisoft's survival horror thing, but primarily the game's ports to other systems, ZOMBI. Why ZOMBI specifically? Because it was the easiest to capture footage for. Don't judge me, it was like £4 on Steam, and all I have to do is hope that Shadowplay won't strangle my poor SSD. But in my first time of using it instead of OBS, I didn't realise it recorded Steam overlays, so yeah, enjoy that. ZOMBI is a survival horror game developed by Ubisoft as a launch title for the Wii U. How the game came to be was from a prototype labelled Killer Freaks from Outer Space, a shooter involving rabbit-like alien creatures that was shown off at E3 2011 and ended up receiving mixed reception. The prototype was praised for its overall original idea and concept, but was criticised for the execution of its gameplay, as the charging aliens made the gameplay very fast-paced and contrasted heavily with the slow and clunky controls. After this reception, I believe someone at Ubisoft named Pierre had a eureka moment, threw their baguette across the room and said something like, "Zut alors, if everyone's finding the controls so clunky, why don't we embrace that by making Resident Evil?" To which that guy's friend Jean said something along the lines of, "So basically we'll make a game that's part of an extremely oversaturated concept, throwing out our praise for originality, and instead just make Resident Evil rather than fix our crap controls?" Pierre, you're a fucking genius. Plus their colleague Xavier was most probably across the room yelling something like, "Hey, should we be developing Beyond Good and Evil 2? And so, Killer Freaks became the ZOMBI we all know and love today, which showed off the features of the Wii U gamepad. And after pulling a Dead Island with their trailer, the game was in everyone's hands on November 2012 to what has to be some of the most polarizing reception I've ever seen. It's not exactly Deadly Premonition levels, but from IGN's 6.3 out of 10 to Eurogamer's 9 out of 10, from some declaring it clunky trash to others declaring it a love letter to survival horror, I had to pick this game up after finally getting a hold of my Wii U. Then the game got re-released on PS4, Xbox One and PC in August 2015. Under the new title of ZOMBI, the game was happily modified for standard controllers as opposed to Nintendo's heavy Wanker's Cramp-inducing Hell controller. The same Wanker's Cramp-inducing Hell controller where they thought putting weird bumps on the back helped it be more ergonomic somehow. So am I going to be scared shitless or scared of how this game was designed? And after playing both versions, was the gamepad even a benefit to the gameplay? That's what we're here to find out as we switch on the projector. So plot-wise, ZOMBI, or as I like to call it, the aftermath of David Cameron, takes a different approach to how zombie outbreaks usually begin. You know what that means? Yes, we're heading into the historical trivia already. Man, am I a joy to have around, or what? ZOMBI presents an interesting grey area of a synopsis as it combines both real-world history along with its own fictional additions. Even when breaking it down, creating a distinction between reality and fiction is quite the level of fact-checking. But I'll do my best. Cue the Dark Cloud music. One of the most frequently mentioned plot elements of ZOMBI is a man by the name of John Dee. In reality, Dee was a mathematician and advisor to Queen Elizabeth I who dedicated his life to alchemy and divination. Being a man of religion and magic as well as science, he was not only a navigator who would conduct voyages, but would also attempt to predict the future through communication with angels, with Enochian scriptures being dug up from his house after his death. Now, in the fictional world of ZOMBI, John Dee is seen as a legitimate prophet, who through angelic communication predicted the real-life Great Bubonic Plague of London from 1665 to 1666, as well as the Great Fire of London. In this fictitious scenario, John Dee provided another prophecy stating that a second blight on mankind will occur in 2012, a more advanced plague in the form of a zombie apocalypse, which brings the end times, and the only reason a select few know of the prophecy is due to Elizabeth I's death, where she was succeeded by James I, who was wary of Dee's use of magic and alchemy, forcing Dee to go into hiding before he was hanged. Jesus Christ, I thought this was a Wii U tech demo. So sometime after the outbreak, you as a survivor with a randomized name and occupation is scooped up by a voice on the radio called the Prepper, the owner of a safe house hidden in the London underground who knew of the prophecy. While at first glance many might have assumed this was an aimless survival game, ZOMBI is actually a linear, somewhat story-focused survival horror, where armed with the quietest pistol in existence and a Shaun of the Dead reference, your initial goal is to survive in a zombie-infested London with the assistance of the Prepper. The world of ZOMBI, surprisingly enough, has a fair amount going on for a launch title with a generic-ass name, and while it's not as fleshed out or extravagant a game world as, say, BioShock or Metal Gear Solid, it's certainly more refreshing than the typical scientific virus approach to games with zombies in them. The game also has smaller elements that add to the world, such as hidden text documents if you're one of those mad people who think that text documents aren't a completely shit excuse for world building, and a few no-nonsense chats with the Prepper where he talks about the fate of the Queen and common fallacies surrounding the infection, like a crotchety old man acting like he should run the country.
Lovely woman, the Queen. For an ancient lizard posing as a human, anyway. Immigration was always a distraction, to let the idiots in charge destroy the country without ordinary folk noticing.
With the world Zombie as constructed, I was won over when I began playing, but as you progress, not much is really done from there. Ultimately, your survivor just acts as an errand boy, being asked to go to an area and do something. And let's just say the plot doesn't have any oncoming twists, revelations, or obstacles. It mostly falls down to surviving, with a bit of linear plot to boot. But who the hell cares about plot? This is a goddamn video game, man. Gameplay-wise, Zombie presents mechanics you're most probably familiar with in terms of survival horror and zombies, but has a few cute little twists up its sleeve that make the experience a bit more tense. The game is fairly combat-centric as you find guns and a scarce amount of ammo around London to defend yourself against an onslaught of zombies. While they're shufflers, they can catch up to you fairly easily, and they're so active and creepy as opposed to seeming like lifeless corpses, what with the unbreaking eye contact and extremely aggravated grunts and yells, making them appear less as reanimated dead people and more like feral animals that are fully aware they want you dead. Even speaking mechanically, the zombies are really deadly, with the piddling but still varied types the game throws at you. You've got your regular blighters, the ones in armor that are harder to kill, the spitters that do ranged attacks, and most terrifying of all, the ones with gas tanks attached to them that explode on any kind of impact that isn't a headshot. These things are such a glass cannon, and in the playthroughs I've done of this game, I've had many an occasion where I've turned a corner, instinctively hit a zombie with my cricket bat, only to have a split second of seeing it was an exploding type with no stopping my swing.
You'll never see it.
But no matter what type of zombie it is, they're pretty capable of doing one thing. They bite. Man oh man, do they bite. Or they claw you to death, or you succumb to your own stupidity such as explosions and fall damage. I've still got a broken leg over here. Shh. What I'm trying to say here is that Zombie has a shitload of death in it. You will die a fair amount in this game, and without the right equipment or amount of patience, the smallest slip-ups are gonna hold up the game. See, every time you die you always respawn in the safe house, and if the thought of the trek back isn't bad enough, you actually respawn as a brand new survivor, a new face with another randomized name and occupation who, just like your first character, only starts off with a pistol and cricket bat. In a similar vein to Dark Souls, some amount of your progression is lost until you decide to go get it back yourself. While Dark Souls had the pools of blood you used to retrieve your souls from, Zombie U confiscates your entire inventory from you, because the previous tosser who died is still holding everything. And depending on how they died, they might have turned into a zombie, so you're gonna have to go back to where you died to track them down, potentially kill them a second time, and then you'll get your precious loot back. Another addition to this mechanic that I love is the storage chest in the safe house that allows you to withdraw and deposit whatever items you wish. Yeah, a storage chest. While it starts off seeming like a bin to chuck any items you currently don't need, I actually found myself putting more valuable items and weapons in there in later playthroughs, considering how if I die, I'll want to make sure my next survivor is equipped from the get-go. It really adds this layer of planning and risk assessment to ensure that you never leave without a good stash, and it encouraged me to find more valuable items if in the event a newer survivor would need them in future. It is a shame that I learnt about this later instead of on my first playthrough, where any new survivor I controlled would open the chest to find it's full of nothing but flares and weapons with no ammo in them. Another thing I adore about both Zombie and Zombie U is the inclusion of Survivor Mode, a second difficulty level where you attempt to finish the entire game without dying once, otherwise you'll have to reset your save file. It's extremely addicting and it's the main source of the fucking 44 hours I put into the Wii U version alone. If anyone who's played the game asks, my furthest point is the King of Zombies where I accidentally killed myself with my own landmines.
Oh, shite, not again!
Oopsie. Because of this form of punishment, the game could be really tense sometimes. My favourite moment in the playthrough I recorded for this review has to be near the end of the game, where for plot reasons I have to go to the underground chambers of Buckingham Palace, which are flooded. After finishing my objective, alarms are blaring, which is drawing zombies from all around. Not really looking for a fight, I desperately charge through the infected, getting scratched up and reducing me to a critical one hit in your dead health state. And like that, I was out. Sweating, heart racing, hands shaking, wondering how the hell I got out alive. These are the moments where Zombie truly shines, throwing you into a dangerous environment that quite literally has a threat around every corner. However, the game is far, and I mean really far, from stellar, and moments like I just described are but a rare occurrence in the game's story mode. Zombie presents numerous great ideas that bring a tense atmosphere and make the player persistent. However, what we have in execution is for the most part a clunky, dull and unfocused game, which isn't what you'd expect from what I've been telling you so far. Past my personal highlights, a large majority of Zombie's gameplay is very simple, linear, point A to point B, slapping an objective and a marker on your minimap. A lot of what you do is going from area to area engaging in combat that gets extremely old after a short while once you realise you don't need the additional fancy tools and weapons at your disposal, because all you really need to do is spam the cricket bat over and over into zombies that have way too much health. Even ones that don't have armor take about 5 hits to kill, and it just gets dull. In fact, the true challenge is hoping to God that when you die you don't respawn with a character that makes fucking annoying noises when they swing the cricket bat. And it's not like Dying Light melee combat where you have additional mechanics to keep it fresh, such as additional melee weapons, agile movement, and some hand-to-hand moves such as kicking. It's just a matter of pushing a zombie into a corner and spamming until you can get that one-hit finisher. The game is also extremely unpolished. Visually, while it may have been impressive for an early Wii U title, it starts to come as an immense eyesore, especially as the Wii U started having significantly better looking games later on in its life cycle. I also experienced a few technical issues on PC, such as zombies clipping through doors, permanent framerate dips that required restarting the game, and hilariously enough I had a graphical glitch in a cutscene that somehow disabled the game's drab green filter that's on everything. I didn't even know that wall was yellow. This also means the game looks horrendous artistically as well, with the previously mentioned green filter, smudgy screen effects on what we should be assuming are human eyeballs, and the small amount of times a human is shown in a cutscene only for them to look even more terrifying and dead inside than the actual zombies.
Shit! But we can still get out. We need a Coast Guard chopper or something. We are not giving up, I swear. I'll figure something out and contact you again, okay? Now,
in terms of controls, it's important to note that ZombiU and Zombie both control fairly differently to each other in terms of navigating UI, with ZombiU sometimes requiring you to look at the gamepad when accessing your inventory, picking locks and what have you, while Zombie optimized these events to be used with a traditional controller. My main thoughts on Zombie is that it's miles better with the gamepad out of the picture, because nothing was truly lost due to the transition, except for the Wii U version's surprisingly decent multiplayer. Real-time inventory management is done with a small pop-up window, and a lot of backpack functions that require tapping on the gamepad's touchscreen are just bound to the buttons and sticks. ZombiU's move to PC and other consoles shows the Wii U gamepad ultimately not being that useful, highlighting that having to use motion controls, a bloody resistive touchscreen instead of capacitive, and having to shift your eyes back and forth between two screens provided a far less intuitive experience. So I can't really say you'll enjoy this game any more or less, even with the gamepad functionality. All in all, while I wouldn't want to come across as that snarky critic who makes the critical one-liners, I'd say when judging it overall, ZombiU stops at its title. It's a Wii U game with zombies in it, and it doesn't really do much from there. While it had so much potential with the small areas it did well, it's an ultimately dry game that doesn't have too much soul or personality as you play it. The game's also immensely unfocused, as it doesn't know if it wants to be a linear action-adventure game with an emphasis on combat, or a slow, open survival horror that encourages exploration, and the whole thing just starts to get messy. That isn't to say I hate or despise it by any means, not at all. I've played it through so goddamn much, especially thanks to the survivor mode, but it has a tendency to turn into an immense endurance test that could potentially bore you to death. The main upside is because of how old the game is, you can pick it up for fairly cheap. I got the Wii U version pre-owned for £8 and the PC version in a sale for £4 on Steam, and it's quite a good game to just speed through. For example, if you wish to know, the save file I created for footage purposes was finished in 3 hours and 42 minutes with 6 survivors, but do keep in mind that's from a fair amount of experience and cricket bat spam. And it's disappointing to hear while I was researching this game that a prototype for a sequel was being developed in May 2013, only for Ubisoft to say the following month that there were no plans for such a thing due to ZombiU generally not being that profitable. Because don't get me wrong, the game would have benefited greatly from a sequel with some immense refining. With what this game holds, I wouldn't recommend you get it immediately, but it shouldn't really go ignored either. Shame about the sequel though, I would have loved to see a zombie-infested Dublin in ZombiU 2.